This is episode 2 of Running for the Train, Recovering from Spinal Cord Injury. Today is tax day, April 15th, except that we're not filing income taxes because of COVID-19. April 18th will be 2 years since my spinal cord injury. I did episode 1 a year ago, and so many things have happened in between that I haven't recorded another episode. And I'm going to do this in just one take without any editing, so it may be a little bit rough. A lot has happened. In June of last year, I left New York City, and my wife and I came back to Ann Arbor after 10 years in New York City. And life is a lot simpler here after coming back than in New York City. We miss family in New York, but our house is right downtown Ann Arbor, so lots of things are convenient for us to get to. And just recently, we were active in the Bernie Sanders campaign, and after being really isolated because of my partial paralysis due to the spinal cord injury, I felt like I was finally coming out of my shell. And now, of course, with COVID-19, we are isolated again. I've been practicing mindfulness to deal with the pain from my spinal cord injury, and now to deal with the anxiety of COVID-19 on top of everything else. I had a dream a few days ago where my wife and I were sitting in a living room. We were visiting another couple, and we're in the living room talking to the woman of the couple, and the guy was in the kitchen with a really sharp knife, and he was preparing some food, cutting some things up for the food. And I leaned over to my wife and whispered in her ear so that hopefully either the wife who was there in the room with us or the man who was in the kitchen would notice. And I whispered in my wife's ear, "Are we supposed to be pretending that everything is normal? Should we be figuring out how we can just run out the door at some point?" And my concern was all the dead bodies that were in the basement that had obviously been stabbed by this man who was with a sharp knife in the kitchen. I don't think you need to be a psychoanalyst to figure out the symbolism of that dream and the current state of where we are at. Fortunately for us, the people that we were active with here locally in Ann Arbor in the Bernie Sanders campaign have stayed connected with us, even though we don't see them physically. We're doing video conferences at 6 p.m. every day and practicing mutual aid. Marguerite has been sewing some masks. We've been in touch with people about patterns, and we've started to build a new website focused on mutual aid and how we can network with people here in our neighborhood. More on that in a future episode, and more on the things that we're doing to cope and get through this situation. With mindfulness, you're taught to focus on the present and not have anxious thoughts. You don't so much try to avoid the anxious thoughts or control them, but simply by being present and mindful of what you're doing, that helps to avoid the anxiety or reduce the anxiety. And anxiety is about the future. Anxiety is about wondering what's going to happen. And just recently, in these past few days, as Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign and then endorsed Joe Biden, a lot of things have changed, and all kinds of people are debating about are they going to vote for Biden or not, and is it too early to start blaming Bernie Sanders for Biden's loss in November? And I've decided that thinking about will Biden win or lose, will everybody be blaming Bernie, and those of us who wanted Medicare for all and similar fixes to society, will we have a big continuing struggle of divisiveness? I've seen Governor Cuomo getting together with 6 other states, with Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island to form a working group. And in addition to that, California, Oregon, and Washington have sent ventilators to New York. So I'm hopeful about mutual aid beginning to be seen at the state level, and I'm hopeful that we can find better ways of interacting with our neighbors and just looking at how we live our lives. When we left New York City, we didn't have a car, and the big question in coming back here to Ann Arbor, Michigan was, were we going to get a car? And we discovered that, at least where we live in Ann Arbor, that we didn't really need a car. And petroleum plants are closing. All kinds of changes are going on now in society. And as terrible as this virus is, I think we all need to be mindful of how we live our lives and take responsibility for the effects on the people around us and on the planet of how we live our lives, and begin to try some things that we wouldn't have tried before, to think of new ideas that may have been hard to think of before. And I hope that it won't take another year before I do another episode of this podcast. And I look forward to hearing from people, getting some feedback on what you think about what I've been saying. I'm Dr. Ron on Twitter, DRRON. So that's a way to get in touch with me until I start giving out more information about the web properties we're working on. So that's all I have for today. This has been episode 2 of Running for the Train, Recovering from Spinal Cord Injury. For those who didn't get the reference from having heard the first episode, I was running to get on the subway train when the doors were closing, and in a half second, my life completely changed. And I ended up being completely paralyzed at first, unable to even scratch my nose. It'll be impossible for me to recover certain functions, but I've done pretty amazingly well in the past year, and I'll be talking more about that also in future episodes. So thanks again. This is the end of episode 2, Running for the Train, Recovering from Spinal Cord Injury.